You're in your 30s or 40s. You have a kid, maybe a few. Throw some dogs in the mix. You get a hangover after 2 beers instead of 10 beers. And crucially, you don't want to drive a minivan. Well, if any of this sounds familiar, you might want to consider the Honda Pilot. This is Honda's only 3-row offering that is not a minivan. And today, we're going to find out whether or not it's worth your money by taking a look outside. Inside, I'm going to show you some of the features and technology. We're going to try and throw a bike in the back to see how usable or not it is. And then most importantly, we're going to take it out on the road to see what it's like to drive. In terms of looks, it really looks like a Honda SUV. The Passport, the CR-V, the Pilot, they all look very similar now. Comment below with what you think about Honda's new design direction for all their SUVs. If you ask me personally, I think this is a great looking SUV. They've started to make their SUVs look a little bit bolder to maybe appeal to more people. They're not as soft as they used to look. And I really like this Sonic Gray pearl color that you're seeing it here. It's a bit of a grayish blue or bluish gray, depending on how you want to look at it. And you're also seeing it here in the Trailsport model. We'll talk a little bit more about that, and it certainly adds to how rugged this vehicle looks. Under the hood, we have a familiar face. This is Honda's tried and true 3.5 liter V6. It makes about 285 horsepower and it's naturally aspirated, which is different than the turbocharged engines and hybrid engines you see in a lot of other vehicles. That has some pluses and minuses. We'll talk a little bit more about on the drive. What you really need to know here is that this is a reliable engine. It's very simple, which is good, but it will suffer on fuel economy a little bit. You're looking at, depending on if you get the front wheel drive version or all wheel drive version, you'll get 19 miles to the gallon city regardless, and then 27 miles to the gallon highway if you get the front wheel drive, and 25 miles to the gallon highway if you get the all-wheel drive. So a slight variation there depending on drivetrain, but nice to know that you can get this in all-wheel drive or front-wheel drive. For wheels and tires, on the base model, you're getting 18-inch wheels. And when you step up to the higher trim models, you'll go all the way up to 20-inch wheels. And rather interestingly here with this Trailsport, we're stepping back down to 18-inch wheels. These seen here are the 18-inch gunmetal gray wheels. They are wrapped in Continental Terrain Contact all-terrain tires. So you're getting a little more sidewall with these 18s, being that this is a little more of an off-road focused vehicle in the Trailsport model. And also worth noting while we're here, the Trailsport model comes with a off-road tuned suspension. The Trailsport suspension is not only revised, but also lifted 1 inch for more ground clearance. Additionally, they bolt on skid plates to protect your underbody should you take it off-road. So safe to say the Trailsport is more than just an appearance package. Inside, if you're someone who prioritizes a usable vehicle, this is absolutely for you. Let's start first with storage because there is an abundant amount. I mean, this center console storage is massive for your purse or your MERS. You also have these massive door cards which will fit a full-size Nalgene. So many cars I get in, and I'm always lugging this water bottle around. It never fits in a door card. It fits in both sides here. You have storage within even the dash itself. Very usable space, which of course is what you need in a family hauler, right? Now, outside of the storage itself, everything is hassle-free and usable. So you get things like the very straightforward infotainment, which of course utilizes Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, which is primarily what you're going to interface with, and it operates quickly. I will say the rest of it is a bit dated feeling, and if I can lob any complaint of this interior and this interior experience, it's the backup camera. The backup camera is horrible quality. The resolution is very bad. Outside of that, though, it's really high marks everywhere. There's no frustration or gimmicks here with the HVAC controls, which are all physical. Same thing for your heated seats. Just click a button. Steering wheel, and really the whole design layout is very similar to every other Honda product that you're getting now. But that's all good because the buttons are very nice. They have a nice feel, a nice tactile click. And of course, as well, you're getting a all digital gauge cluster, which is very simple. And I'm just gonna harken all this back to, it's a gimmick-free experience. It is very usable and very functional. Now, being that this is a family hauler, you're also gonna wanna know about the rear seats. Well, this middle row I fit in great. There's sort of captain's chairs in this model, and there's plenty of room for a full-size adult. I'm 6'1", and the back, of course, is gonna be more for children. There's just not a ton of room there for a full-size adult. But all that said, it's just a excellent execution of what a 3-row SUV should be. Let's try and cram a bike in the back to see if it is the ultimate in utility as well. 3-row SUVs really have one major job, and that's to haul people and things around. If you've seen my videos before, you'll know I like to see what's the biggest bike I can fit in each vehicle, preferably without taking the front wheel off. I'm happy to report that the biggest bike I have, a extra large frame 29er mountain bike, fits in easily with no disassembly required. In some ways, this is expected for a 3-row SUV. However, if you haven't seen my latest CX-90 video, I'd encourage you to go watch it because it couldn't tout the same capabilities. And as always, if you enjoy the bike test, I would love it if you hit the subscribe button and left a comment down below. The warmth of that V6. When I do any car review, of course, I try and put myself in the mindset of somebody who would be interested in buying this vehicle. Now, we're going to go on a little bit of a mountain road, but that's for fun because it's a good view for you guys, and it's a little more entertaining than me just driving around town, of course. So now this is not the intended purpose of this vehicle, but we could still talk about all the things that make this car good, that really make it appealing to somebody buying a 3-row SUV. And the thing I keep thinking about is the CX-90 that I just drove, because this is a natural competitor. So driving these back to back is really great because I can really kind of compare the finer points. And what I noticed immediately driving this are the qualms that I had with the CX-90 are really just addressed with this car. First and foremost, the steering is very light and nice and quick. You know, not too quick that it's darty, but what it does is it makes this car feel nimble. As I lose my audio recorder, it makes this car feel nimble. And the reason for that is because the steering is light and it responds a lot quicker than that CX-90. Now, this is, that car had a very linear rack, and they're going for more of a sports car experience, but that's realistically not what you want in this car, right? You want this to feel easy to drive and effortless around town, of course, around a parking lot, which is realistically where this car is going to spend all its time, right? Just driving your children around. So that steering is nice and light and effortless. The other thing that's worth mentioning is, I had a big problem with the transmission in that CX-90. Now, this is not the best transmission I've ever experienced in my life by any means, but it is significantly smoother, specifically at low speed. It doesn't have any of that herky-jerkiness that I was getting in the CX-90. Now, a little bit slow to respond, but by no means bad, and is totally adequate for its intended purpose once again. Now, speaking of adequate, this engine, and that makes it sound bad, right? Like, just saying an engine is adequate makes it sound bad, but this engine, 285 horsepower from this V6, totally adequate, but I mean that in a very good way. It has just enough power to get out of its way. You're not really ever wanting too much more power within reason, and it's by no means slow. And we're even at altitude here. I'm probably at 6,500 feet, and it still responds well. It gets out of its own way. I've driven this car up into the mountains pretty significantly during the week that I've had it. So I've experienced 10,000 feet, and even then, it's really not bad. So the outside of the engine being adequately powered, I think it's also worth noting that it is a naturally aspirated engine, And in that sense, it's going to be pretty reliable for you, right? It's a naturally aspirated Honda motor. This thing's going to last a long time. So that's really important. The only knock you could maybe say about it is the fuel economy. Not horrible by any means, but not best in class by any means either. I've been averaging about 19 miles to the gallon. Now, you have to consider that that is pretty close to worst case, because essentially what I've been doing is driving up and down the mountains. So not exactly the most fuel efficient form of driving. But being that it's simple, I think long term it will in some ways pay for itself. So while you will pay a little more money at the pump, you're really not going to have to do anything other than put some oil and change the oil in this thing, right? Compared to things like the CX-90, which is turbocharged, which is certainly going to have more maintenance going forward. You think about things like the Highlander. The one in front of us, of course, is an older model, but the Highlander right on cue shows up. The new one, you can get in a hybrid model, which is going to have way better fuel economy, but more complicated. Of course, you're going to have to replace the battery in 10 years or so. So for me, I think it's worth saying that this is a good car to buy and hold rather than lease. Something like a CX-90, maybe even a Highlander as a lease, because not sure you want to hold on to that through all those maintenance issues long term. So outside of the last thing I'll say about the engine is I did reference that sort of warmth from the engine earlier. A naturally aspirated V6 just has such a nice tone to it. So you do get that benefit compared to some rattly four-cylinder. Even the CX-90 sounded okay, but for a inline straight six, I expected a better note. So this kind of gives you that nice sound as well. What else can we talk about? I mentioned the steering is light. The handling itself is very good. It is definitely soft, but in a good way. And in that sense, I think about who this car is once again intended for. You want something that is very compliant, is going to soak up bumps, and that's exactly what this car does. Maybe a touch of floatiness sometimes. It's not a sports car, but I would rather have a three-row SUV slightly on the floatiness side as opposed to being super stiff, sort of like that CX-90 was. So the suspension, very, very compliant, soaks up bumps like so well. So all that is really great. And outside of the suspension, really the only other thing worth talking about probably is the quietness of the vehicle. Hondas tend to me, based on my experience driving other vehicles similarly priced, be so much better refined for the money in the terms of the materials that you get, the solidity, the noise, vibration, harshness is very, very good for the money, in this class, especially when you consider being that it is one of the cheaper three-row SUVs that you can actually buy. It certainly doesn't feel like the cheapest, and that's an overall just benefit, a high mark for Hondas in general these days. So that part is great. And I already mentioned, I think this is a good buy and hold vehicle, not something that you necessarily need to lease and be worried about it breaking on you. But very much enjoyed my time with this vehicle. So I would highly recommend, if you're in the market for a three-row, go take a look at this thing, man, because it doesn't necessarily excel at any one category, but it does everything at a pretty high level. It's sort of like eights all the way around, instead of the CX-90, where the CX-90 had like 9s and 10s in some categories, but like 4s and 5s in other categories. This, to me, is a better all-around vehicle because it does everything at a relatively high level, and that's really what I'll leave it with. So I appreciate you guys watching, as always, and dealing with this slow traffic here. If you've made it this far in the video, we are just crawling behind this Highlander. So thanks for watching, as always, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.